Hey, what's up, everyone? Gleekon here, one more time, bringing you another episode of Lore of Warcraft. And today we're going to continue chapter 11 of the Warcraft novel of the Warcraft movie. Last chapter, it was, well, it's been a couple days since yesterday I did a longer run on the classic walkthrough with doing the first pass through of Blackrock Depths, kind of doing the lower part up to getting the key, the Shadowforge key. So check that out if you want to see one of the coolest dungeons in the game, at least the first half of it. I let me just look at the last piece. I got a cheat here. Basically, I can't even tell from what we're seeing. Gul'dan was consulting with like whoever his master is. That's how he finished it. Lothar was kind of talking. Oh yeah, it was like a short chapter. The Alliance is out. They're going to try to scout out the Black Morass. Garona is with Lothar and Khadgar and a couple other soldiers. And meanwhile, Gul'dan is consulting with whoever his master is. I think we know who it is. So stay a while and listen as we read chapter 11. Lothar had thought he would be prepared for anything he would behold. He was wrong. Now, standing beside Garona and the others as they stared at the horrifying panorama spread below them, Lothar felt both stunned and sickened. War was never tidy or clean. It was never like gazing at one of Lane's maps, even when strategy was orderly and victory was certain. But this? Tents. Hundreds of them dotted the landscape, punctuated by watchtowers and larger constructions. There were cages, too. Not as many as he had initially feared, but enough to make Lothar's hands clench in anger. Cages crammed with humans, men, women, even children. So this was where they had gone, seized and carried off while their homes burned about them, taken like animals. And further on, enormous chiseled hunks of stone, hauled by the labor of the physically powerful orcs and arranged in a pattern. A flat, level base like the foundation of a building, or something much worse. The Great Gate, Garona said, pointing to the stones. Why do they need so many prisoners? Lothar asked. The breeze caught Garona's black hair, playing with it. Her gaze did not leave the terrifying diorama as she spoke, and her words made Lothar's heart shrink. Like wood for fire, she explained. Green magic takes life to open the gate. Lothar's gaze was dragged back inexorably to the scene below him. How many more orcs are they planning on bringing? Her reply was simple and stark. All of them. She waved her hand at the scene. This is just the warband. When the portal is opened, Gul'dan will bring the horde. And all at once Lothar understood what subconsciously he had been denying. These hundreds of tents were essentially just the beginning. A horde. Get them back to Stormwind, he snapped at Kairos, already heading for his horse. Varys and I will ride ahead. Garona gazed after Lothar and Varys as their horses galloped off. Thoughts crowded her mind. Was she truly doing the right thing? Why did she even have any loyalty to the orcs? They had murdered her mother, and she had only been spared from the fire herself by the will of Gul'dan. He had taught her how to read and write and ordered her to study and learn other languages, but she was always a slave, always bound, always sneered at or spat upon, except by a few. Every time she was filled with hatred for her treatment by her so-called people, she recalled Durotan, twice a voice of reason for his people, and his wife Draka, who had treated her with gentleness and care. Other orcs might drown sickly children at birth, but the Frostwolves gave their weaker members at least a chance to earn their way back into the clan. Draka herself had been one such, and she became the maid of a chieftain. Garona had hesitated when Durotan freed her and extended his hand. But she knew if she returned with him, Gul'dan would simply reclaim her, and in that moment Garona had tasted freedom, and she knew she would die before relinquishing it. She thought of Queen Taria, treating her even more kindly than Draka had. Of course, Taria wanted something. Garona fully realized that, but what she wanted was to save her people. So did the orcs, but they were doing it by killing those who were not orcs. First the Draenei, now the humans. Thought of Khadgar, such a pup, so eager, but with a power she respected and didn't understand, and she thought of Lothar. He had saved her from the furious Frostwolf. He had not been as overtly kind as Taria, but Garona understood his mistrust. She knew enough of darkness to know when it had touched someone, and Anduin and Lothar surely walked with shadows. She had seen the pain in his eyes at the loss of his men in the recent battle, the horror at the thought of the innocent farmers being held captive, their lives fodder for more orc destruction. He was good, she decided. Though he had a sense of humor, she recalled the term Lothar had used to Khadgar, bookworm. Grona smiled, turning to look at the young mage. An orc stood in the shadow of tree branches. He held Khadgar under one arm, his massive hand clamped over the boy's mouth. The young mage stared at Grona with wide, alarmed eyes. A few feet away, from the orc, lay the body of Karos, unconscious but still alive. Duraton, Garona gasped. He grunted in acknowledgement. To the north is a black rock that touches the sky. I would meet with their leader there. A sliver of fear sliced through her. To challenge him? She was surprised at how much she did not want Lane to die, nor, truth be told, Duraton. He shook his head. I saw you lead the small teeth to our encampment, he said, stepping closer, still holding Khadgar, but with care. They have seen what is being built, but only you know what Gul'dan has planned for my people. His eyes bored into hers, and he spoke as if the words tore at him. You warned us, Garona. You told us he was dark and dangerous. I only came in the end because there was truly no other choice. Garona knew Duraton might have chosen death for himself, but he did not have the luxury. He was a chieftain, and he took care of his clan as best he knew how. This magic is death, he said, for all things. It must be stopped. So he had seen, he knew. Their gazes locked for a moment, then Duraton nodded. Tell him, the Black Rock, when the sun is highest. I will, Garona promised. Duraton nodded. He seemed unaware that he had completely shattered everything Garona had believed she could ever expect out of her life. If Gul'dan fell, she surged forward. Chieftain, if I return, would you take me into your clan? Duraton's eyes traveled to her throat, her hands, a throat and hands free of chains. You are safer here, with them. And she knew he was right. The hope died, and she simply nodded. The chieftain looked thoughtfully at the boy he still restrained. The mage, still as death, stared up, barely blinking. Duraton released him. Khadgar made no move to run or to utter a spell. Duraton punched him very gently in the chest, a comradely gesture, then pressing a hand to his own chest in a gesture of respect and gratitude to Garona, the half-breed slave, he stepped back into the shadow-dappled light and vanished into the trees. The raven soared, its superlative vision taking in the scene below in a detail that ripped at his heart. Even those with poorer sight would have been able to see the destruction, though it was blatant, excessive, and seemingly everywhere. Amidst the healthy green of foliage, the bare spots, gray and black and burning, stood out starkly, one and another and another. Medivh collapsed beside the font, barely able to plunge a hand into its restorative depths. Energy infused him, but more slowly and less thoroughly than it had in the past. He was drained dry and recovered less completely each time he pushed himself, but he had to. It was his charge. Moros knelt beside him, calm, steady, eternal. The Castellan had dwelt at Karazhan for a very, very long time, longer than Medivh had, longer than the previous guardian, or the one before that. In his own way, he was as much a part of Karazhan as its stables, or its kitchen, or even its font of magic. Quietly, sorrowfully, the older man asked, Is it as you feared? Medivh pressed his lips together and nodded. He kept his arm in the font as he replied, his voice weak and cracking. The fell. It's everywhere. Then you mustn't leave again, Moros stated. They need a guardian's help now more than ever, Medivh answered. His voice was so hollow, so terribly weary, even in his own ears. Maybe the boy could help, his old friend suggested. Could he? Khadgar had shown initiative and courage. Maybe he could. Wearily, Medivh turned his head to look at Moros and froze. He stared over the Castellan's shoulder, his eyes fixed on something or someone that might or might not have been there, a ghostly black form pointing directly at him. Begone! Hissed Medivh. Moros turned, but saw nothing. Lane sat upon the great throne of Stormwind and despaired. It had taken this, an incursion of bestial creatures determined to wrest the entire world for themselves, for the diplomats currently scowling in front of him to even agree to meet. And now that they had gathered, no one seemed to want to listen. Taria had often commented on her husband's cool head, one that had not been nearly so cool in years past. Now it seemed that he alone was keeping even a semblance of calm as those assembled ranted, protested, and took below-the-belt verbal strikes at one another. The representative from Kultiras was holding forth. His people had recently tasted the fury of the orcs, and he was not about to let Lane forget it, though he himself seemed to forget that Elwyn Forest had been among the first targets.
Stormwind the High and Mighty always thinking itself better than the rest of us. You knew what would happen to us, yet we fought and fell alone. Where was your army as our ships burned? My army is losing a regiment a day,
Lane replied. His voice was tight, even though he fought to stay calm.
Stormwind, Kultiras Lordaeron quelled the loss. Dwarf, human, and elf, all of us in peril, and all of us squandering precious time arguing among ourselves. We need to work together.
The representative of Lordaeron scowled.
What we need, he snapped, are more weapons. Dwarven forgers must work overtime.
He turned and regarded King Magni with an expectant expression, as if the dwarf ought to immediately start spitting out swords and battle axes. Magni was apoplectic. When he was able to manage words, they came out in strangled staccato bursts.
You treat us no better than dogs. You refuse to protect us with the very weapons we make for you. We shall supply you no more.
Lane leaped to his feet.
Enough, he shouted.
The raised voice of the normally mild king silenced the bickering for the moment. Everyone turned to look at him.
All of you have called on Stormwind in the past, either for troops or arbitration. If we do not unite to fight this enemy, we will perish. Stormwind needs soldiers, arms, horses. Ha! We have our own kingdoms to look after, shouted Magni.
Fight your own wars, added the Lordaeron representative. The doors swung open. Lothar marched in, Varys following a step behind. Everyone turned at the interruption. Both men were dirty and sweaty, and Lothar had a wild but determined look in his blue eyes that Lane recognized. Whatever this was, it was bad.
The orcs are building a portal, Lothar stated bluntly, through which they plan to bring an army. If we do not stop them now, we may never get another opportunity.
The old friends locked eyes. Unspoken was the question that the elven representative had no trouble articulating.
Where is he?
He demanded, his musical voice rising with his anger and likely his fear. His robes whirled about him as he turned back to Lane.
Where is the protector of Azeroth?
Aye, the Kultiras representative chimed in.
Where is the guardian?
Taria leaned over and whispered to her husband.
Where is Medivh?
Lane's jaw clenched and he took a deep breath, forcing calm upon himself as he turned to address the gathering.
I suggest we take a recess. Take as long as you like, the Lordaeron representative interrupted as he and his companions rose.
We are done. A courier shoved his way through the departing Lordaeron group, handing a missive to Varys. Varys read it quickly, then approached Lothar.
Commander, Varys said quietly, what's left of the Fourth has retreated from Stonewatch. What's left?
Lothar echoed. His face is paled beneath its layer of sweat and grime. Varys hesitated, then said,
Callan is among the injured.
Lane had overheard, and despite the disaster unfolding in front of him, he did not hesitate.
Take the griffin. Go.
Lothar flung open the canvas door of the makeshift field hospital tent, heading straight to the figure on a bed. His boy's eyes were closed, but as if sensing his father's presence, Callan turned and managed to partially sit up. His boy. His and Callie's. Light, but the boy looked so much like his mother, it cut Lothar every time he laid eyes on him. The sandy brown hair, the gentle hazel eyes. Seeing him lying here reminded Lothar of the last time he'd seen his wife. The beloved face had been pale as milk, circles of pain underneath her eyes like bruises. She'd always been so fragile, his little Callie. Too fragile. There were no bandages wrapped around his son's slender body, no white saturated with red, and he remembered a day when there had been red. Too much red. Callan had only a gash on his forehead. Did not look too bad, but Lothar took his son's head in his hand and turned it this way and that, checking. Callan regarded him almost sheepishly with his mother's hazel eyes.
Dad,
he said. I'm fine. It's fine. Lothar forced a smile. Those eyes had nothing of him in them. They were all hers. You had me worried, Lothar admitted. There was an awkward silence, then he added, trying for a little levity, You should have been a baker like I wanted. Too dangerous, Callan deadpanned. All those oven burns. Lothar found himself chuckling. When he was very young, Callan had stated that he wanted to be a soldier. Lothar had replied, Wouldn't you like to be a baker instead? Think of all the cakes you could eat. Callan had thought about it for a moment, head cocked to the side in a gesture so much like Callie that Lothar's heart had felt like lead. The child answered, Well, I bet lots of people would be happy to bake cakes for soldiers, because they're so brave. When Lothar had mock complained that no one made cakes for him, Callan had suggested that Lothar himself become a baker. He was surprised and moved that Callan remembered the moment. He ruffled his son's hair, his hand not quite knowing how to do so, and looked around. He'd been so focused on his son that he hadn't realized that Callan was the infirmary's sole occupant. A chill settled over him. Where's the rest of your troop? Callan shook his head. They can't all be dead. They took most of us alive, Callan answered. People are saying that they eat us. Fear-mongering, Lothar said, though the reality facing the prisoners was possibly even worse. Callan winced slightly at the harshness of his father's voice, and Lothar gentled his tone. You hear the same stories about every enemy, every war. Don't worry, son. We'll get them back. Callan immediately sat up as if he was about to head out right now. Lothar placed a hand on his chest. Don't be in such a hurry. He played with Callan's rumpled uniform, smoothing it as he had done when the boy was small. You're all I have, he said softly. Callan endured it for a moment, then squeezed his father's arm, a gesture of appreciation, but also of rejection. Lothar removed his hand. Callan's face looked strangely old on such a young man, the expression of one who had seen too much. Dad, I can't do this. I'm a soldier. Lothar thought about the violence the orcs had displayed in their attack. He imagined his gentle-natured, somewhat shy son battling for his life against the oversized monsters, which were shockingly strong and eerily fast for their size. Tell him, he thought. Tell him that he's brave, maybe braver than you were at that age. Tell him you love him and you're proud of him. Tell him it wasn't his fault. Lothar only nodded and turned to leave. It's this depth of backstory and emotion in the characters, the nuance, the real things. We're in this epic journey between two armies, monstrous, terrible things happening, demons, magic, portals. And Christy Golden does a really good job of infusing believable backstories that really enrich the characters. And maybe, even if some of these things, maybe like, let's say Chris Metzen said, you know, Callan is Lothar's only son and the mom died in childbirth or whatever. There's just a way she has of touching on it and making it real that I do really appreciate. I think she is an undervalued writer, and she does fit this genre quite well. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching, listening, and tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well as I did. I'll see you guys on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft, because of this, Chapter 11, and episode in the pipe 5x5.